Hello, this is Dr. Martin, and we're starting the final section of our Chapter 2 notes. This is week 5 in general biology, so let's get started. This is some familiar information that these terms are they're not going to be new to you. We're going to talk about some fine-tuned information, drilled down a little bit more than probably what you're familiar with, but these are going to be very familiar uh, terms and terminologies and concepts for you to understand. We're going to talk about organic molecules. This is the last third of chapter 2. These are organic molecules. Organic molecules are molecules that contain carbon. Now, they also contain hydrogen and nitrogen, but they all contain carbon. Methane gas, one that we've talked about already, it's one carbon molecule bonded to 4 different hydrogen molecules, CH4. We've talked about that. In fact, we call this a hydrocarbon. This is a hydrocarbon. And there's a lot of hydrocarbons studied in organic chemistry. So we're talking organic molecules. They contain carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen, which means their bonds, their links between the atoms are all covalent bonds. That's from the early part of chapter 2. So these are all covalent bonds, uh, molecules sharing electrons, especially carbon. And what we're going to talk about are about 4 main classes of organic molecules. You've heard of all of these: carbohydrates, carbs. These are sugars and starches. We're going to talk about those. We're going to talk about proteins. Your body is more than 50% protein, so we need to talk about protein. Same way with all the body tissue of all organisms is about 50% protein. Nucleic acids, DNA, RNA, and then lipids or fats. All of these are very common terms that you've heard in the past in past science classes, and also just common social media and the media. You hear about these compounds all the time. Carbohydrates, proteins, lipids are very common in our diet. You eat these. Some of us have a very high carb diet, or some of us have a high protein diet. So it just depends on, like a keto diet. It just depends on, or a low fat diet. I really need a low fat diet for some heart conditions that I have. So we consume these in our foods, but our bodies are also comprised of all of these organic molecules. Some of these are very healthy, some are not all that healthy. Here's a really nice table. In fact, this table really summarizes this part of the chapter. We're going to talk about carbohydrates. In fact, we're going to talk about specifically simple sugars. Then we're going to talk about complex carbohydrates. We're going to talk about proteins, nucleic acids, lipids, different types of lipids like steroids, triglycerides, or fats. And so all of these, again, very familiar, but let's talk a little bit about each one. But first of all, these organic molecules are large. Now, I know large is relatively speaking, but these are bigger molecules, bigger than just the atomic level, bigger than just the water molecule. These are pretty complex molecules. In fact, they are large molecules that are made up of units of smaller molecules bonded together. We could say it this way: they are monomers, one molecule, many of them bonded together to form a polymer, a large molecule. And so these are polymers, big molecules made up of smaller units of individual molecules. Carbohydrate polymers, protein polymers, nucleic acid, but we're going to talk about all of these kinds of polymers. Big molecules made up of smaller units. Now, the way these big molecules are made in your body and in nature, in plants and animals, is, remember we talked about this, they are units or monomers where water molecules are removed or dehydration occurs, and that causes these monomers to join together to form polymers. It's called dehydration synthesis. An H2O is removed. Now, that's called dehydration synthesis. Now, just the opposite is true as well. If our bodies, if we want to digest these big polymers, if we want to break them down, we simply add water, what we call hydrolysis, and that tends to separate the monomers into their individual units. Our bodies of all organisms, we are constantly building these molecules and tearing them down at different times and at different parts of our body. So monomers used to build polymers. So the first polymer we want to talk about, or the first organic molecule we want to talk about, are carbohydrates. You know these in your foods that you eat, but you also consist of a lot of carbohydrates as well. First of all, there are monosaccharides. Mono meaning one, saccharin meaning sugar. These are simple sugars, what we call monosaccharides. Now, these simple sugars are used to build more complex polysaccharides here in a minute that we're going to look at. But you know these monosaccharides. Glucose is a very common sugar. In fact, all carbohydrates that you consume are broken down into glucose and then taken to your cells to be used to make energy. It's what we call glucose. Fructose is a very common sugar in plants. Ribose is a very common sugar in plants. So all three of these sugars, very simple monomers. They're C6H12O6. It's big. It doesn't sound very simple, but it's the most simple of the carbohydrates. Ribose is a classic one. Glucose is a classic one. Fructose in plants is a classic one. All of these are simple sugars, monosaccharides, what we call single sugars. They tend to be very sweet and they're very dissolvable in water. These are simple sugars or monosaccharides. Now, these are disaccharides. These are di meaning two, saccharin meaning sugar. These are double sugars. These are formed by two monomers joined together by removing a water molecule, dehydration synthesis. These are so a little bit more complex than the monosaccharides. You know some of these too. Sucrose, common table sugar, refined is white and unrefined is brown, but common table sugar is a double sugar or a disaccharide. Maltose is a it's a sugar found in grains, and malt beers are made out of maltose sugars, fermented maltose sugars. These are grains. The sugars found in milk. Lactose is a double sugar or a disaccharide. So they're a little more complex. In fact, this diagram is pretty nice. Notice there's a glucose removing some H2O. There's a fructose. They are bonded together to form a double. Remember, these are C6H12O6, simple monosaccharides. But look here, it's almost double. C12H22O11 is sucrose, maltose. Lactose are other types of double sugars, and they're formed by dehydration synthesis. Now, in nature, big sugar molecules, complex sugar molecules, are what we call polysaccharides. It's not just two sugars bonded together, it's multiple sugars bonded together. These are really complex. Whereas the other two types we talked about, they tend to be rather sweet to the taste, kind of dissolvable in water, but not here. These are such big, large, complex molecules, not sweet to the taste and not dissolvable in water. Cellulose, the first one at the top there of this diagram in this figure, it's a very complex polysaccharide found in plants. Cellulose, it's found in the cell walls of plants. Starches are found in the cell walls of complex fruits, like not really vegetables, but fruits like potatoes. Glycogen is found in the liver. Some other very complex carbohydrates, chitin, Chiton. Chitin is the crunchy part of the exoskeleton of insects, clams, oysters, crustaceans, lobsters, crayfish. That really hard shell is a very complex carbohydrate called chitin. The polysaccharide in the cell walls of bacteria, peptidoglycan, it's a word you've heard in the past, is a very complex carbohydrate. So you see, I'm beating this to death here, but these are complex sugars. In fact, We don't even use the word sugars. We use the word starches to identify these polysaccharides. So these are all carbohydrates. We start out with very simple monosaccharides. We bond monosaccharides together to build double sugars or disaccharides. We use multiple monosaccharides to build polysaccharides or very complex carbohydrates. We cannot digest these. We can eat these. We can eat plants. Vegetarians, we eat. Vegans, we eat non-dairy. We can consume all the plants we want, but we cannot digest the cellulose that's in plants. Cattle and herbivores, horses, goats, they can, all the herbivores out there in the animal kingdom. It's really hard for them to digest it too, but they try really hard. In fact, they have multiple structures in their digestive tract to handle this very complex polysaccharide called cellulose that's found in plants. But you and I can't digest it. It's just fiber, and we basically expel it out of our system. Um, Bacteria that live within our intestinal system, this is what they help us digest, our carbohydrates. They are fermenters. They ferment our sugars, break them down, try to get as much vitamin D out of it and absorb it into the intestinal wall. So that's what bacteria in your gut, my gut, that's what they do for us symbiotically, is they help us break down these starches or help us break down these other sugars into more simple sugars. Proteins, I said this a minute ago, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on proteins. Proteins comprise about 50% of the body weight of every known organism. Very important for the structure of all organisms. They have a lot of different structures, have a lot of different functions. Um, we kind of say it like this. Your text will talk about it this way. There are structural proteins that comprise the structure of our bodies: hair, bone, nails, ligaments, tendons. All of these are proteins. But then those are structural proteins. But then there are functional proteins that perform specific functions. We find many of them in blood. Immunoglobulins are antibodies, are proteins. There's a lot of blood proteins that are used in your immune system. Insulin is a protein. So many different proteins that are functional proteins in our bodies that we use. So very important. Now, they are polymers, big molecules made up of smaller units of molecules. Some of these you've heard of. They are called amino acids. These are the small monomers that are used to build proteins. There are about 20 different amino acids that are known to consist all proteins of all life on Earth. That's pretty incredible when you stop and think about it. The same 20 amino acids that are used to build your proteins in your body, same amino acids that are used to build the proteins in a caterpillar or a moth or a redwood tree or a fungus or a bacteria. We've only discovered 20 different amino acids for all life on Earth, but there's different arrangements of these amino acids and different content of these amino acids, numbers, percentages of these amino acids. But all proteins are made up of amino acids. Those are the monomers that build the polymers of proteins. There's some chemical properties here of these. Some are polar, some are charged, and but there's only 20 different amino acids. We're not going to learn any of them here. So here's how we build them. We build proteins in your body. Your body is constantly making protein. You're constantly making bone. You're constantly making blood. You're constantly making proteins, bone, hair, nails, tendons, ligaments. But you're also constantly breaking proteins down because you consume a lot of protein. So remember, we build we build proteins by joining amino acids together. We do that by removing water, what we call dehydration synthesis. How do we break down proteins? By adding water or hydrolysis. We've mentioned this several times, but that's how we make proteins, your body, and then that's how you break down proteins digestively into their simpler forms. Um, let's talk a little bit about nucleic acids. Not a lot to talk about here. It's pretty complex, and we can't oversimplify it enough. So I'm not going to talk too much about nucleic acid. But nucleic acids, you know these as DNA, RNA as well. DNA are your chromosomes. It's the genetic information that you have in every cell of your body. Some cells are non-nucleated, like red blood cells, bone cells, but you have to make red blood cells, and so they're non-nucleated. But this is what's incredible: is at the point of conception, at the point of your original sperm cell from your father, egg cell from your mother, from the moment of conception when those two cells came together, you had 46 chromosomes or 46 DNA molecules. There was enough information on those 46 DNA molecules to build you. That's remarkable. Now, you're about 6 trillion cells large now. We consist of about 6 trillion cells. Every cell is a clone of that original cell that was formed by your mother's egg and your father's sperm. It's pretty incredible. Now, we know there's some mistakes in every cell division, but generally speaking, every cell is a clone of your original cell. Well, this DNA is used to build you. It's used to build the different organs of your body, the different tissues of your body, the different proteins of your body. It's all of the information was on your DNA. DNA is confined to the nucleus of every cell. RNA is used to copy coded information and take it out into the cell and build things, especially proteins. RNA is kind of a messenger mediator, but these are what we call nucleic acids. Now, they're big molecules, and again, made up of smaller molecules. So here's a unit of a monomer that's used to build DNA. It's a phosphate, pH4O4. It's a sugar, and it's a nitrogen base. Notice these are bonded together here, bonded here. So there's 3 units here that are used to build big or large DNA molecules. These are the smaller molecules used to build DNA. This unit here of a phosphate, sugar, and a nitrogen base, these are called nucleotides. Hopefully we can talk more about DNA later in the semester. But it's a big molecule made up of smaller molecules called nucleotides. Last thing we want to talk about are lipids, fats. Um, you know a lot about this just from the foods you eat. Our body weight, fat content, BMI, all of those things. When you get to BMI age and you go to your primary care physician and you get your blood work done, well, some important numbers you look at are your cholesterol numbers, your lipid numbers, your high density lipids, your low density lipids, and you have no idea what I'm talking about, but every person over the age of 60 knows exactly what we're talking about. In fact, that's what we talk about when we get together, our carbohydrate or our lipid triglyceride numbers, and it's what we do. And so, but lipids are big. They're big molecules, pretty complex molecules made up of smaller units of monomers. So they are polymers made up of monomers. Look at this. I think you know this. Lipids are very hydrophobic. They don't like water. Fats and water don't mix. Oils and water don't mix. It's because lipids are hydrophobic. They don't like water, so they tend to repel water. Okay, so here's a fat molecule. This is a very basic fat molecule. It's a glycerol or an alcohol that is bonded to 3, look at these long chains of carbons and hydrogens. There's three of these, and these are three what we call tails or fatty tails here. So this is a monomer that's used to make fats. It's an alcohol bond to three what we call fatty acids, which are long chains of carbons bonded by hydrogens. This is a pretty simple lipid here. But let's talk a little bit about different types of lipids. First of all, there's triglycerides. Tri meaning 1, 2, 3 chains of acids here. There are saturated fats, and then there are unsaturated fats. Have you heard those terms before? I know you've heard of steroids. We'll get to that here in a minute, but triglycerides are long linear chains of carbons, three of them, 1, 2, 3, that are bonded to an alcohol, or this is what a fat molecule is. Monomers that build polymers. Now, notice these carbons are bonded with the maximum number of hydrogens. This is a saturated fat. Carbons saturated by hydrogens. But notice this tail over here. Carbons, there's a little kink in it. See that? We're missing a hydrogen. This is an unsaturated fat. So that's the difference between two different types of fats, are saturated fats and unsaturated fats. Now, you know this. Saturated fats tend to be animal fats. Lard tend to be solid at room temperature, whereas unsaturated fats, like this kink in this tail here, unsaturated fats are more of our oils. They are liquid at room temperature. Your body does not handle saturated fats well. Saturated fats tend to have an affinity to the arterial walls, especially those around our heart, can cause what we call atherosclerosis or occlusion or blood blockage in our heart vessels. If you have parents and grandparents, they may have had stent or open heart surgeries where they bypass that blockage. Well, it's because saturated fats are not easy for our bodies to break down. Unsaturated fats, oils, you can name, how many oils can you name that are fats, that are unsaturated fats? They're missing some hydrogen. They tend to be liquid at room temperature, much easier for our bodies to break down, much more healthy in our diets. Canola oils, peanut oils, coconut oils, all of our, soft, what we call oils, liquid at room temperature. And these are much easier for our bodies to break down. Steroids are not linear like these. Instead, steroids are circular fats, ring structures in fats. And your body uses steroids. Cholesterol, we use cholesterol in the structure of our cells. All of our hormones in our body are steroids. Very important for epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol. All of these are steroids that your body needs structurally and functionally that are fats. So those are, see if we can talk a little bit more about some of these here. So here's the saturated fats, saturated with hydrogen molecules. Here's the unsaturated fats where we are missing a hydrogen molecule. Make sure we understand the difference between structurally between saturated and unsaturated fats and their physical properties. Saturated fats are animal fats, tend to be solid at room temperature, and unsaturated fats are vegetable fats, tend to be liquid at room temperature. And which ones are definitely more healthy versus those that are not. And there's some information here about both types. Here we are with the steroids. Here's that ring structure we were talking about. Cholesterol is a very important one. All of the hormones in our body, testosterone is a estrogen. All of these are very important functions in our bodies. Well, these are steroids or fats. Well, that's going to